going to talk about claims fraud detection in insurance, which is a pretty old concept, as mentioned by Stefan before. And the question is why we are talking about this still now, and what has changed recently and what will change in the future in order to fight this old enemy. And so I'd like to start with a specific subject that was very interesting to me a few years ago, 2-3 years ago, and we were talking about fake news. And I was surprised at that time why we were talking about something that we were always using the English words, even in French, because I'm a French speaker, to describe. So fake news is all over the place when we discuss about elections. And I found myself in a very surprised mood when I saw that the new president of France, Macron, planned to fight fake news, but only during the election period. And deciding what would be the truth would be pretty comfortable for the next elections. And so I found that pretty interesting because for me it was something that was pretty new. And I said to myself, but is it really new? Are we talking about fake news just now? Is it something that has emerged from the news, from the medias, from the politicians? Or is it something that has always existed? And maybe like me, you thought this was more or less something which was pretty new. But actually, fake news has always existed. So you have here an example, for instance, from the 17th century, and in England, where the king there had to suffer some criticism about different stories that were more or less told on the street and even printed. And so why am I saying this? Because if it's not new, why are we always talking about fake news? Why is it so popular to talk about fake news? It's popular because of the Brexit, because of Donald Trump, and because those guys have used pretty smart ways, actually, to use some personal data they have gathered all over the place, especially on the internet, for instance, Facebook. And because they have used new modern tools in order to target some people who were pretty much very undecided in terms of what they would vote for. And therefore, they've managed to win some very key votes or elections. We know that Nigel Farage, for instance, was the first to work with Cambridge Analytica. And then we know that he's been helping also with Steve Bannon, Trump. So while these guys can be seen as evils, I think they have been very smart, smarter than the opposition, actually. And why I mention this, it's because maybe we can relate this also to some other aspects. And when we talk about claims fraud, what's interesting is not the fact that it's a pretty old concept. What's interesting with claims fraud is we have new weapons now. And insurance companies need to understand that they can apply some different types of technologies in order to fight this problem. So let me get back to this very topic, which is claims fraud detection. What are the different elements of claims fraud? First, you need to have data. Again, if you look at the fake news story, it's exactly that. The data is very important. Without data, you cannot really do a good job. And so insurance companies now need to be able to leverage data, but they need to be able to leverage structured data mainly, or at least they need to be able to structure it if it's unstructured. And they need to turn this data into valuable information for making optimal business decisions. They need some specific models. They need some people who will be able to develop algorithms and models in order to find the truth or potential frauds. They can apply this in the claims fraud context using different techniques, and I will mention this later, what I mean by that. And then, of course, these tools need to be used by SIUs and investigators. But let's start with the data preparation and what has changed over the past 10 years. So now insurance are able to leverage a lot of different data sources. So not only the internal data they manage, or at least they collect, using the core insurance systems, but also any kind of excellent data sources we can find now using, for instance, the internet, like, for instance, forums, blogs, or even some public data schemes. With this, they can also work on models. This data is very useful, to apply some different risk mitigation techniques, severity model, frequency, risk avoidance. If you look, for instance, at the claims fraud detection side, more and more we see insurance companies learning from what they have identified as potential claims fraud, automating this, and then trying to also improve, optimize the claim settlement. So all these kind of aspects are pretty important nowadays for insurance companies. Now, there are different fraud techniques. First example, for instance, pattern identification. Typically, if you have a medical provider who tends to overcharge some certain kinds of treatments based on some pretty wrong diagnosis, this is certainly something that would show a red light. You can also identify some anomalies in the way, for instance, treatments are delivered based on some very weird diagnostic, very important indicator. If you are an insured and you've just had an accident, generally you will have to report in writing what happened. And mining the text also helps sometimes discover some different words that have been used that can be also some good indicators. Social network analysis, and we'll have Joe speaking later, but social network analysis is also important, especially, for instance, in car insurance or health insurance, when people have good ties together, and you can see that on social networks. But actually, then you can also sometimes identify that one of the third party involved in an accident was actually a very good friend of the person who is the claimant. Image screening also, we've seen more and more insurance companies using image screening, especially to use some kinds of localization data and make sure that actually the image that has been taken is really from the car where the accident happened. Voice analysis, more and more we see insurance companies using call centers to try to identify some emotions in the voice. That could be also a good indicator of fraud. And all this can be modeled. And all these, more and more, insurance companies are trying to use machine learning, actually, in order to make the machine make the decisions that a human would do normally. And so we are at a certain stage now where artificial intelligence has taken over different aspects of the claims fraud detection aspect. And this is where insurance companies are trying to invest more and more. Every year, we survey European insurance companies and we ask them different types of questions. And one of them is where they are in terms of investment in artificial intelligence. Last year, out of the respondents, 32%, one-third approximately, said they are currently investing in artificial intelligence. This year, this has more than doubled. So 3 out of 4 insurance companies in Europe is currently working, investing, and having specific programs in order to apply artificial intelligence in their organization. This is a survey we've launched in summer this year, and this is not limited to Europe. This is a global survey. 140 insurance companies answered this survey. And we asked them where they think artificial intelligence technologies have the potential highest impact in the organization. And as you see, more than 2/3 think that claims management is certainly where these types of technology has the highest impact. It's twice more than sales and distribution, for instance. It's more than customer service. So claims is really a hot topic when it comes to this type of investment. And this is normal because claims is directly impacting the combined ratio, the technical ratios of insurance companies. And in our market here, in our industrialized countries, in our mature market, we know that this is very difficult to generate underwriting profit. So this is not a surprise for us to see this evolution. In terms of the types of technologies that are used in claims, For the same insurance companies, it seems that they use different types of technologies in claims. They have already invested in data science more globally. They are trying to automate with robotic process automation. They are also using different other types of technology, like for instance, data ops. One-fifth of them are using data ops. And this is an interesting topic that more and more we face when we discuss with insurance companies. They always ask the question about how can we industrialize the way to use machine learning and these types of technologies. They want to avoid having to code and to develop using different types of tool, being open source or non-open source tool, and having very expensive data scientists. They want to find a way to industrialize some of the work. So it's why data ops is a very important aspect. And so more and more, we are going to see these technologies being on the top of the agenda of CIOs in the insurance sector. This is a very interesting quote from a French insurance CEO. Maybe I will read it. "I have been reluctant to use AI as I was not convinced of its value. But with the initiative we've launched, I now understand that powerful computing power," this is the first point which is important, "relevant data, second one, and algorithm combined together can drastically improve our business." With this definition or with this quote, I think we have a clear view of what is actually the AI equation and how it will influence going forward any kind of investment insurance companies are going to do, especially in claims fraud. And so first, powerful computing power. We've seen over the past 20, 30 years a decrease in terms of the cost to use computing power. And we can consider now it's very flexible to get computing power in order to run very high-level calculation. And therefore, it has become a commodity. The second aspect is relevant data. And I have mentioned before that insurance companies can now tap in very various data sources, not only internally, but also externally. And we also know that every year there are more data sources and there is more data that is created than the past 100 years. So we are seeing a lot of interesting data for insurance companies and exponential growth of this data. So combined together, if we add to this the ability of algorithm to learn from running all over this data and using this computing power, then we have some pretty powerful results coming out of this. So for instance, how can machine learning help here? It's, for instance, identifying some data sources that would add a lot of value in a specific model. So why don't we try to find the same type of data? So all these cases shows that insurance companies can invest more and more in these technologies and need to really understand each of the business cases where they can use these technologies in order to improve and automate these kind of decisions. But with this, the question is always, how can we make sure that what we do is not just about technology? And this is the question we regularly have with insurance companies. So here another quote. "The best way to have business staff understand the value impact of AI is to show real cases." Yes, so we understand that insurance companies need to have the right tools. They need also to have the right people. But the question is the culture there? Are people interested to accompany the company in order to implement these kind of tools and in order to do a good job and have more decisions being made, especially by machines? And this is the key question we have currently with insurance companies who are asking us how they can find the optimal equation between the tools and the people and have this been implemented in their internal organization. Do they need, for instance, to create some specific departments to do this or not? How does it affect the claims fraud detection department? So these are the key questions we have. So we've decided to ask this question to our set of insurance companies in summer. We asked them, what are the building blocks for success? And we see that for them, it's not about the tools. It's not necessarily about the skills and the data. What's very important for them is the culture. And when we talk about the culture, we talk about also the C-level guys and how they are involved in helping the organization accept changes. And so when we look at these specific codes, manifestly, you need to be able to show the staff some real business cases and the value it generates in order to make sure that there is a way to generate this kind of culture. And of course, there is also the question, and this is all the time when we talk about AI and claims fraud detection, investigators, for instance, estimators in claims are very important. The idea is how to make sure that if we implement this kind of initiatives, then we can make sure our people understand that it's a way also to reallocate some people in more difficult cases that we cannot solve using these kind of technologies. It's worth mentioning also that data is still a very important aspect to consider, and insurance companies still struggle a lot to deal with internal data, especially with their silo organization. It's very difficult for them to find value in internal data, and they need to find some technologies in order to get a better view of the customers. And then skills, because we see, especially in our Western European market here, a shortage of skills. It's data scientists, computer scientists on the market, but the problem is the insurance industry is not very attractive to those people. So it means that insurance companies have also the competition of specific technology firm. FRIS, for instance, is an insurtech which is very interesting to work for, and maybe it's more interesting to work for FRIS than to work for an insurance company. So it can be difficult for insurance companies to find the skills and also to develop what they need using these kind of technologies. So overall, like for fake news, the enemy is not new. So it's known. The question is not about whether claims fraud has been there for quite a long time. It's always been there, as mentioned by Stefan. But the battleground and the weapons are continuously changing. And what we've seen, for instance, happening in the fake news world, and how it's been well targeted to people who were undecided in order to get a great outcome for the ones who have used it. This is what insurance need to do. They need to really apply these kind of technologies in order to really improve what they can do using the machine. And we are going to see this more and more going forward. And this is why AI, being in claims fraud detection or being in any other domains, but especially in claims, is certainly there to stay on top of the agenda.